Hi there, it's Andre with the Impulsive Thinker podcast. Just want to make note that this episode is brought to you by KADAK, the Center of ADHD Awareness Canada. Today, I've got a very special guest, the co-founder and president of Strategic Coach, Dan Sullivan. He is my business coach and entrepreneurial guru, I can almost say, or simplifier is a better term. Thanks for coming on here, Dan.
Thank you, Andre. It's a real pleasure. I just want to say, yeah, we've had many conversations in the past, and we're kind of exploring very similar territory, both as entrepreneurs and, just as human beings, because we both share a condition which a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is ADD or ADHD.
Yep.
And I'm not hyperactive, but I'm easily distractible, and so I have dealt with a lot of burdens and frustrations in my life simply because I didn't know that I had this condition. And once I found out, then I went through testing and analysis, and I received, fortunately, a pill that I can take, Adderall, which works for me. I was 66 before I discovered this, and I'm just about 78, and it's been marvelous. It's just been the most productive, creative, but more important, really enjoyable part of my life. I worked really hard. I was successful before, but I wasn't getting the enjoyment, and this really connects a lot with what the concept that we're going to discuss today.
Yes, and before we get started, what I want to do, Dan, is start with a positive focus. And for the listeners there, it'll become clear as we get going on this episode, but we're going to start with a positive focus. And for me, is I've had 3 great conversations with fellow ADHDers, yourself included today, and 2 others for raising awareness. And I was on another podcast, forget the name of it, but it had a great conversation about self-awareness and self-transformation. So that's my positive focus for this week. Dan, yours?
Yeah, and we just discovered this week that the book, The Gap and the Gain, which we're going to discuss with Penguin Random House, which is one of the biggest distributors of books in the world, that our book in the ebook version of the book was their #1 bestseller for 2021. And I'm really delighted with this because this is a major way in which our program, Strategic Coach, gets marketed is through these books. So I'm really very
delighted. I think delighted.
I'm very delighted. And then show them the book, because this is
delighted is an understatement, and honestly. For your book to be that highly rated and against other big name authors, like this is a concept book, not just for the high achieving entrepreneur or highly ambitious. This is for everyone, right? You came out with The Gap and the Gain as a concept in your Strategic Coach program, which was the first time I heard of it. 2017, you came out with a smaller book, what you call from your ambition series, The Gap and the Gain, which just clarified it further more than the concept in the workshop. And then last year in 2021, in October, you and Dr. Benjamin Hardy partnered up or collaborated to produce the large market book.
And that's another success, is this collaboration, because Ben's the writer, and he has the added dimension that he's got his doctorate in psychology. So there's a lot of very solid clinical research that backs up what I think are sort of intuitive concepts that I have that come from the fact that I've personally coached 6,000 entrepreneurs, pretty much almost 50 years that I've done it. But mine is just testing out, see what works, see what doesn't work. But he actually has research. And we have 10 books in 10 years. We have an agreement with our publisher of 10 books. And so this is #2. We had one called Who Not How.
A phenomenal book. Yeah.
And 10 times is easier than 2 times this year. So, but every year there's going to be a book for 10 years. So that's another big
That would be another big changer. Like the thing you said that Dr. Benjamin Hardy brought research to the book, but I'll tell you right now, it's not a research book.
No,
it's not, we're not lost in a lot of research and theories and numbers. He brings a theory into it, but explains it in a very layperson term, my apologies, simple, so everyone can simply understand it, and comes up with real life examples, and then has a process at the end at each chapter to make it actionable. So I highly recommend this book. And then with your small book, Dan, I share this with both my girls, and the youngest was 8 at the time and understands the concept immediately. Actually, she was cleaning up her room the other night and she pulled out the book, says, "Do you remember this, Papa?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you remember the concept?" She goes, "Yes, I'd like to review it again," she said. So you got cartoons in there. The Small Ambition books is less than an hour read. And the Gap in the Gain large book is phenomenal.
I really tell you that she's getting the conversation with you at exactly the right time, because at 8 years old, you're still a hero to her, Andre. When she gets into her teens, she goes sideways with
the proper tools, though.
Yeah, and I mean, teenage years, these years, kids get an incredible overload of really, really negative messages.
Exactly.
And the Gap in the Gain gives them protection against all the negative images that they're getting from social media, from the normal kind of gossiping that goes on in teenage years, the bullying, and the unrealistic expectations, and everything else. So it's a real gift.
What is this Gap in Gain that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So let's just talk about the human brain. And the human brain has a remarkable ability to see the future in such a form that you can get emotionally committed to something that doesn't yet exist.
Okay.
So and we call this the ideal. We have an ideal for ourselves. When we look at every part of our life, we could see improvement in different parts of our life, our personal life, our business life. But the ideal is not measurable. It's like a very bright light that allows us to see a future reality, possible reality. But what it does do is it lets us identify in the near future a goal that we can achieve that is measurable. So it encourages us to start a process. We go through the process, and we achieve the goal. But if you're doing it in the gap, what happens is that you have the achievement, and everybody outside, you have witnesses, and they say, "This is really," talking to you, Andre, they say, "Andre, that's amazing what you've achieved here." But if Andre is taking the achievement and measuring back against the ideal that got the whole thing started, it's like you haven't achieved anything, because the ideal, like the horizon line in space, the ideal is exactly in time what the horizon line is in space. It's how we come to grips with it. And
guilty of that.
You haven't achieved anything.
And that's a negative rumination possibility with the ADHD brain, if we get caught in that trap. And I know the listeners listening, we're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. So how do we get out of that?
And I would say, we have, right now we have 22,000 active entrepreneurs in Strategic Coach Program. And I bet when they first come into Coach that 80 to 90% of them is what they do. They drive themselves. Well, I didn't get it this time, and they double down, they drive themselves more, but they never get happy with their progress, okay? So it's like a switch, the switch on the gap. Doesn't matter what you achieve, you won't be happy. You switch back to the other side. It's the gain. Works exactly the same way. You have the ideal, lets you see short-term goal. You start, you achieve the goal. But when you achieve the goal, you turn around and look backwards to where you started, and you say, "Gee, I achieved a lot," and you feel good about it. So the whole point here is that all happiness is created by you measuring your progress backwards.
So where I started, I got to look where I started to where I am now, not where I am now to where I think I want to be or where I want to be.
Yeah. You cannot be happy measuring your progress forward against the ideal.
So, and then like in the book, Ben stated, like, I got one quote from his, they go in the gap because their want becomes a need.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's very important for everyone listening here. Like that want that we're like Dan just explained, we got to achieve more. We never achieved that ideal. So we're going to try again. We're going to go again. And then becomes a need. And we get in a habit of that's the way of thinking. I know I was there. I still fall into it time to time. So gap is every time you measure forward, and the gain is every time you measure backwards from where you were before.
Yeah. You measure backwards to where you started the achievement.
Right. And then the analogy of the horizon as being the ideal, you'll never reach it, but you can always go towards it, but never achieve it.
It's not for achieving. That's not the reason for the horizon.
Wrong word.
The horizon just allows you to see what you can achieve. The ideal just allows you what you can achieve. Okay. It's not there for achievement. It's there to focus your attention on what you can achieve.
I think that's a key thing you just said there. We need the ideal to give us a direction of where we want to go, but to get there, to be happy with our success and to measure it, we got to look backwards to where we were, just like losing weight. Either I lose a bunch of weight, that's my ideal goal, but we should actually fix it to, I want to lose 10 pounds, but look where I started last week. I was 210 pounds. This week I'm 205. I gained a loss of 5 pounds there.
Yeah. Your gain was a loss of 5 pounds in a week. Yeah. But that's measurable. It's not about some future thing, but you wouldn't have even established the goal if you didn't have the ideal. And we all have an ideal of our future self. We all have a picture of how, but I will tell you this, and here's where you really get into dangerous territory, is that I talk to people who are not entrepreneurs. And I say, well, what do you want next year? And they say, well, I don't set goals. I'm not a goal setter. And I said, well, how do you approach life? Well, I just take it one day at a time, and whatever happens, whatever happens. And they act as though they have achieved some sort of superior or spiritual state, But it isn't. It's just that every time they set a goal in their past life, it was so painful when they achieved the goal, because it always felt like they had achieved nothing because they were measuring against the ideal, that they stopped having goals, because goals make me unhappy. Striving to achieve a goal is unhappy. And they explain it, I just live in the present, and I'm just okay. But they're making up a story to tell, to cover up for the fact that every time they've actually tried to achieve something, they failed. And the other thing is, they don't even believe they're ideal anymore. They won't allow themselves to think about the future, and they become very cynical. They actually become very cynical. So
that hurts. That hurt me there a little bit, Dan, because I'm looking back to when I graduated university. Everyone's asked me, what are my 5-year goals? And I'm like, I don't have 5-year goals. I have no expectations because I can never get disappointed that way.
Yeah.
And I never had that context that you just said. Goals were disappointing once they're achieved, but I think it's along the lines of this gap and gain, because we're always measuring towards an ideal, not necessarily the success I had from the past.
Yeah.
And I think that can relate to a lot of the listeners.
It's very sad, I mean.
It is. Oh,
yeah,
man.
I mean, I mean, if there was some really big, complex, complicated reason for why it is, it would be one thing, but it isn't. It's just the way they're measuring. They never learned how to measure properly,
No.
their achievement.
No, and especially us ADHD people, like especially you've been doing it wrong all this way, you should try harder and whatnot. So if it's so simple as you claim, how can we flip this switch?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a habit. First of all, you have to accept it's a habit. The reason why you always measure this way is because you've been doing it for a long time, and You were never taught otherwise. I can't think of I can't think of anybody who has any educational experience where the teacher tell them, I'm going to really teach you how to measure your progress. Okay, I'm going to
Correct.
really teach.
Yeah.
The teacher never learned it. The teacher never learned it. So, it is what it is. And but what you have to do is that you have to treat this ability to measure backwards as a skill that you're going to develop through daily practice. And the way you do it, and it's really great, it actually works tremendously well with entrepreneurs and their spouse and their children, because you have there's this wonderful thing called evening dinner together as a family. Yep. And you just start off, and you could just do with one win. And you say, what was the biggest win today? And the kids will say, Dad, is this part of that corny program that you go to?
Another life lesson.
Yeah. And you say, no, just look back and where did you improve? What did you do better today than you had done? And it takes a little bit of urging, it takes a little bit, but they do the one, and then everybody else at the table does it. And all of a sudden the kids lock in. They say, oh, are we going to do this tomorrow? Yep, we're going to do it tomorrow. Okay. And then you say, okay, we did a round where everybody said what the win was and why it was a win. And one of the big things that you teach is that you're teaching them a skill that all of you at the on the table are equal to each other.
Right.
Mom and dad, and the child, and if there's siblings, the brothers and sisters, we're all equal to this. We each have a day to live, and each day we're going to get a win. And we're going to hear everybody else's wins, and we're going to hear why other people are happy with those wins. And we have one win, but we just learned 4 other ways of winning. Okay, so they start to say, oh, you can win at a lot of different things. And then you do a second round, and you say, okay, what can we each do tomorrow that tomorrow night we can report this as a win? Okay.
So be proactive the next day.
Yeah, it doesn't. You're not held to that. You don't have to do the thing next day. Something else may occur to you. I thought my win today was going to be this, but something else was better, which was good. And then you do it, and it reinforces itself. But here's the thing. Don't get started on this with your children unless you're going to do it every night.
Why is that?
Because they really like it, and then you'll be disappointing them if one night they don't do it.
Yeah, my analytical mind went, oh, that's how you build a habit, how you create a habit. But that's a good point, because we do that with our staff. And every time we go to a workshop, a strategic coach, we always do a review of past wins to start the day off. And you guys call it
the moving future, and
and you guys call it the positive focus.
Yeah. And I do it with every meeting in my company. And I do it at social events. If we're having a social dinner, I say, let's do a positive focus. And everybody goes around the dinner. Yeah. And people who aren't used to this, they're not in.
They're lost.
Yeah. No, they're not. They're just enchanted. They say, oh, this is amazing, because most people lead kind of isolated lives, people become very human to you when you see what they consider to be progress in their life and how excited it makes people very.
Well, they're heard.
Makes them very accessible. It makes them, you establish common ground. And so if you're around Dan, I mean, you're getting
the positives.
If you're starting anything with Dan, you're getting positive, because I'm as susceptible to the gap as anybody else. But I've learned, I've got really strong gain muscles. I build up really strong gain muscles over.
So you fall into the gap is what you're saying. You're not perfect.
No, every day I find myself for 3 minutes or 5 minutes here. I was really irked by, I can always tell because I'm kind of irked by something, and I'm kind of irritated. And I said, okay, what are you measuring? How you measure it? And you say, oh, I say, where did this start? And you measure backwards and say, oh, this is okay. This is okay.
So the goal is not staying out of the gap. The goal is actually to get out of it quicker.
No, the goal is to expand the amount of your daily time that's in the game. And if you, I mean, at the beginning for some people, it's like 3 minutes. And I said, well, boy, you got an enormous amount of potential. You can get it up to 30 minutes. You can get it up to 3 hours. You can get
for a year.
Yeah.
I know for me, I had a year.
Well, there's always more time that you can expand the game to.
And then with our ADHD brain, like never stopping, looping and if you're susceptible to negative rumination, you're not aware of that. That really builds up the gain longer and forceful. But if we start to get aware of negative rumination and aware of being in the gap, we just got to figure out to get out sooner. And it's a simple process. Like the positive focus, believe it or not, is a simple tool and actually works.
Well, here's another thing. You brought up the topic of ADHD. I'm technically ADD. I'm not ADHD. Okay.
You have a hyperactive mind.
You have to run around, Andre. I can be completely ADD sitting still. You have to get up and run around and
I'm moving on my chair here as we're talking.
Generally speaking, I'm going to put on fat easier than you are because you're running around burning off fat. But the thing about the ADD is really interesting. And everybody says because our brain is so fast, actually you're ADD because your brain is really slow. Okay. And the reason is because what's happening outside of you isn't interesting enough to you to actually get engaged with it. Okay. It's not new. It's not exciting. It's not motivating. Your brain just won't click.
Not novel or urgent.
But the moment, and really what does focus you is having significant responsibility and a deadline to produce something. And all of a sudden you go into hyper focus and you can produce amazing results in a very short period of time. The problem with us, ADD, is we're so deadline driven that we won't do anything on a project until you just have enough time to get it done, and then we go into full force. And therefore, when we look backwards, we have a tendency to see all the time when we weren't working on the project as failure.
And guilt, yes, exactly.
And failure and guilt. You know, if I'd only started this early enough, you know, I wouldn't have had to have that rush at the last moment.
And in that case, we're actually measuring against someone else's measuring stick in this case. So that's external of us putting us into the gap. And that's the ideal goal there, is to be normal as the other people. So that's very interesting. You brought that up. Yes.
Exactly. So what I tend to do is if I have a project that has a deadline, first of all, I never do it alone. I'm always in teamwork with other people. And then we have internal deadlines going towards. So we break it down into 5 sub deadlines. So first thing we're going to get done is that. And I respond enormously to where I'm in teamwork with other people, and I have to deliver a certain result for them. Okay, so that's the way that I've overcome this tendency to push things to the last moment.
Well, because it's urgent, gets more interesting, and then our brain fires up and gets going. But I think the listeners should really take a good point of this is we feel guilty because we weren't doing anything before when we could have. But be aware, that's because that's how everyone else does it. They can do it slowly and work through. So we're measuring our success based on someone else's measuring stick, and just say, this is how we work. Chunking it down is good because we can actually make it work quicker by breaking it down with other deadlines. Very great strategy. And it keeps our brain active, and we can stay out of the gap more. And by measuring backwards. So an ideal is a mental capacity to see ourselves in the future to create goals.
And have an unusual amount of emotional connection.
Excitement.
What I notice, and this, this, I would say, is the greatest kind of difference between entrepreneurs. I'm not talking about ADD entrepreneurs, although
just in
a
general,
lot of entrepreneurs
Yeah.
have an unusually high degree amount of ADD, but they get emotionally committed to a future version of themselves, and that gets them started. But it's when they get to the achievement, they've actually achieved the requirements, that where they actually achieved it, they have the tendency to go back to the ideal to see how much they've done, and they've done nothing in their mind because the ideal moved away, just like the horizon.
And that's measuring forward.
That's measuring forward. Always makes you unhappy. Measuring forward against the ideal.
Exactly.
Always.
And
The other way is do the achievement, turn around, measure backwards. No matter how much you've achieved, it's progress and you feel good about it.
And that's a goal because it has to be measurable.
Yeah, a goal isn't a goal unless it can be measured and it has a deadline.
Right. And then so the gap, every time you measure forward, the gain means you measure yourself backwards against where you were before. The tool to use is the positive focus. And I'll tell you one thing, when I first heard about that concept, I said, yeah, whatever. But to not be a hypocrite, I'll try it. And so I can go back and say, I tried it, it doesn't work. And I've never looked back. And like Dan says, it works with meetings, with team members, family members, kids, all kids at whatever age. Thanks, Dan. Like the book Gap in the Game is available at any retailer. Available.
Yeah, and there's an ebook version of it that's on Amazon. You can go to strategiccoach.com and
gapinthegamebook.com.
Gapinthegame.com. You can go there, and people learn. I want to say that people learn in different ways, and some people learn through listening and the Audible. Some people, really like having their books on their Kindle.
Yes.
And so I'm a Kindle reader for the most part. So I download books onto the Kindle, or the book version is available in the actual book.
And like now, the thing is with the Gap in the Game book, if you take the audio book, there's actually extra material in there where Dr. Benjamin Hardy is actually interviewing Dan and have a great conversation. And wow, that conversation and more observations is powerful. So
can I tell you a little story? We were in the studio so Ben does the actual reading of the actual text of the book. And that's all done before I get to the studio. And then I get to the studio and he takes each of the chapters now, and he's created 2 or 3 questions about it. And then he interviews me on the substance of what the chapter was. So we did it, and I could see right off the bat we were creating entirely new material. And Ben was saying, wow, I wish I had put that in the book. And I said, well, we're putting it in the book.
Yeah, and it's a great bonus.
And we got to the end, and the sound technician said, I've been doing this for 25 years, and usually I don't even hear anything that's being said. So I just, he said, I'm on automatic. I'm not listening. He said, this moved me to tears 3 or 4 times. I was listening to this, and I was just seeing my life going. And I said, that's a pretty good testimonial. That's
and really it's good. True, and it's very true. So the Gap in the Game, people, I highly recommend the book. It's for everyone, not just entrepreneurs. I think it's very beneficial for the ADHD entrepreneur to understand this concept and practice the positive focus. And that's why we started this episode with a positive focus. It actually changes the mood and makes you more positive moving forward. So if you find this very beneficial please share this with at least 2 people if you can. If you can provide us some feedbacks at questions@theimpulsivethinker.com, or rate this episode and provide some comments. It'd be great to hear from you. Dan, thank you very much for your time.
Great pleasure, Andre. And I like our teamwork here. That's really great.
Yeah, it worked well. And we actually
not just today, but the whole project and creating, the thing. I've really enjoyed it.
I appreciate it too. And hopefully we can work more on this. Thanks again for listening. And this was brought to you by Kadak. And we'll talk to you soon.